Hi guys, this is Nia. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be painting something simple and easy. I'm going to be painting leaf doodles, which can be applied to any of your flower paintings as fillers. As usual, I'm going to start by drawing it out first. I'm going to draw 10 types of leaves varying in leaf shapes by doing things like elongating, shortening, or even changing the shape. This drawing process is the ideation process, and you can recreate either of these same ones or even create additional leaves if you get any new ideas from drawing these out. The possibilities are endless, and it can be changed with something that is so subtle, like how this third leaf is flimsier even though it has the same type of long leaves as the previous one, but because the previous one was drawn straight out, it gives the impression that the leaves have a bit more substance, so it looks a bit different. Another thing that I like to think about is also how they branch out. Things like how many leaves there are in a single branch. So even though the first 3 leaves are quite similar in terms of shape, but because I made those subtle changes, the leaves now look a bit different. For the 4th leaf, I changed the shape of the leaf itself by making it shorter and rounder in shape. And remember that you can also play with this shape and alternate things like the branches, size, and placement of the leaves. Moving on to the 5th leaf type, these are pothos draping down to create something that is a bit different. And for this, I like to create heart shapes for the leaves, and I'm going to draw it out in different angles, but if it's too difficult to play around with the angles, you can also draw them as flat leaves. It'll just give a different feel to the painting, but it'll still look fine. And here you'll see me turning simple shapes into leaves. So here I just drew out circles and ovals scattered around in that area, and then connecting everything with thin stems, with the next one being 3 small stems with tiny teardrop shapes as leaves running on either side of the stems. The next one is a little bit more complex. These are chicory leaves, and I went into a bit more depth in my chicory flower tutorial, so if you're interested, I'll link that in the description box. And these are just examples where you can take inspiration, and you can even replace any of these if you're not interested in those shapes or you would like to add on to it. I personally really like the shape of the chicory leaf, so I wanted to include that in this collection. For the second last one, I drew out something similar to the 7th leaf type, but because these are enlarged and the leaves are only slightly more rounded, it creates a different look to the leaf entirely. As for the last leaf type, I decided to do another draping vine, and I wanted to create small leaves, so I used small ovals and circles and placed them around the vines, and I have to say this is probably my favorite one to draw and paint. So these are the 10 leaf types that I'm just going to use as reference and repeat whenever I need to. As for the colors, I wanted to use up what's left on my palette, but I know that it won't be enough, so I'm going to add 3 colors to whatever is left on the palette. And those colors are yellow, Prussian blue, and black. Now I'm just going to go ahead and paint the leaves that I drew out before. I had the drawing of the leaves right next to me, so I can always take reference from the types of leaves that I drew out to fill the page. So if you have a larger page, you might even want to draw out more than 10 types if you want to. I think that it's always great to also have a library of leaves or flower doodles for you to keep as a collection. That way, when you do have an art block, you can always refer to those pen or pencil doodles. My page is fairly small, and I just started out with the first leaf, but there's no need to do this in order. Just start with whichever leaf you want to. You can also vary the size and placement. You can even rotate the positions if you would like a more dynamic composition. In fact, I didn't even have an image in my head of what the finished composition would look like when I was painting this. I just painted for the sake of painting and using up whatever's left on my palette. I think painting this way is more relaxing as there are no expectations, and it's really fun to see what the finished painting will look like. So I'm sure if you guys were to do this, the colors would be completely different to mine, and it would be really interesting to see. I think that this is also a good chance for me to use colors that I'm not used to. Like, as an example, I have a section of purples and reds, which I always use to only mute my greens for leaves, as a lot of greens on my palette just look very overly saturated and unnatural. But this time I don't have a full composition to paint, so I use this time to experiment using different hues as well for the leaves, and sometimes those unsuspected colors can also bring more life to the painting as well. Sometimes I like to even just water down the whole section of my palette and see what color I come up with. Like the grays that I use to paint the second leaf. Gray isn't necessarily the color that I would pick to paint leaves, but I actually really like how the color turned out. And even grays have different hues to them, and it's really fun to combine other hues to this gray and see what the combination will look like. The only thing that I keep repeating in my painting is the fact that I like the stem to be slightly darker than the leaves, but this is something that I'm also going to build a bit later on as I layer more paint, because it's a bit easier to increase the intensity and value after the first layer is dry. For the round leaves, I like to use slightly different hues and values, so you can go a bit crazy with the color if that's your thing. And I like the fact that when they touch, the colors would separate each of the shape even if they're still a bit wet and slightly blending together. Then once I'm done painting those round leaves, I connect everything together with thick paint for the stem. I personally like subtle changes of the same basic tone, and I think that using whatever is left on my palette is also a good way for me to step outside of my comfort zone while still limiting myself to certain tones that I'm not used to. But in the end, the colors will work together really well because technically I'm still using similar mixtures, just in different ratios. So I'm just going to basically paint all of the leaves that I drew out before and see how much space I have left on the page. Meanwhile, I just want to ask you guys something. So I've had a couple of requests from people to create a Q&A video. Personally, I've never made anything like that because, I mean, I'm pretty boring and I didn't really think that anyone would be interested since I mostly use this channel for educational purposes. But if any of you are interested or would like to know something about me or maybe about art or watercolors, I guess you can just list those questions in this video and I would just pick a few that I can answer for the Q&A. I don't really know how this works. I think most people do this over Twitter, but since I don't have a Twitter account, you can just comment here and I'll try to compile the questions for a future video and see what I can answer. I won't promise anything though, it just depends on how many people are interested in this or if I get any questions at all, and we'll just see when the video will be published. I'm onto my last leaf now. This is my favorite one because it's really easy to draw and paint, and I think that it also looks really ornamental. One thing though, when I am painting leaves which are overlapping each other, I try to change the value just like the previous one with the circular leaves, which are the silver dollar eucalyptus leaves. Basically, since watercolors blend through the wet areas, I try to wait for those parts to either dry out completely if I want a clean line, or if I want a slight wet on wet effect, I just wait until that surface is a little bit damp before adding a new layer of paint with that different value in order to separate the shapes. But this is something that you might want to experiment with, because depending on how wet or how damp or dry the paper is, the paint will travel at different speeds, so just be mindful of that. Now that I've finished painting all 10 alternatives, I decided to just fill the rest of the page using the leaves that I've painted, but I'm going to slightly vary it by changing up the amount of leaves in a branch and size of each leaf to fit in the space that I have left, or just paint any type of leaf that comes to mind so I can customize the shape for specific areas. This is pretty mindless. I didn't really think about anything much when I was painting this. It's just a really nice activity to do with calm music in the background. After I feel like I filled most of the space, I start to go over certain leaves which might look a little bit flat and add some details and different values. I went over some areas to darken parts of the leaves or even add lines or details for larger leaves. I'm not really finished though at this point, so when I do see empty spaces, I just jump around and add more leaves and just work on filling up the areas where I felt is a bit too empty. I really like this part of the painting because it feels a little bit like a puzzle, and I enjoy figuring out the shapes of leaves which suit certain empty spots. Here I felt like the page was quite full already, so like any other painting, I always take a good look around to see which areas I can layer to increase the contrast. For this, I firstly make a dark tone to go over the stem specifically, but I didn't mind if I change up the hue slightly, so since I made a darker blue-green, I just placed it around any of the stems, and I don't mind mixing the different hues like purples and different colored leaves as well. And this is the part of the painting where I feel like those color combinations work unexpectedly well, even though they're not the traditional go-to colors for leaves. They're subtle minor changes that if you were to paint on a separate piece might just look like black in color, but those dark tones also has hues, and this can work to complement the tone of the main colors as well. I just continue to add the additional details until I'm happy with the contrast, and I think that this step is what makes a painting look more finished. Even though I'm doodling, I like to make sure that I add additional layers, because painting with one layer sometimes can make the painting look dull and flat. I'm not saying that you can't, but it's much harder to achieve good contrast when you're only painting with one layer, since you won't be able to glaze and add darker tones, and it would require such control over your paint to be able to create those different values with only one layer of paint, which is why I always choose to layer my paintings to finish everything off. So that's it for this painting. It's not really a tutorial, but I hope you guys still enjoy this easy doodling session and still get inspiration to create your own paintings as well. As usual, all the tools that I used as well as my social media links will be in the description box. If you're interested in participating in the Q&A video, don't forget to leave some questions in the comment section so I can take a look at them. And if you're still here, thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye!